I opened my dream restaurant, but he said, my mother should own it, not me. Rain tapped a steady rhythm against the front windows of Sweet Dreams Bakery as Caris Monroe arranged her fresh cupcakes in the display case. Each swirl of frosting wore a tiny sugar violet, her quiet trademark. These early hours were her favorite, the ovens already off, the air warm and fragrant with vanilla and cinnamon, the street still half asleep. On screen, Auntie May's familiar voice would chime in, "Welcome to Auntie May Story Threads. I share new life stories every day, so don't forget to subscribe and like this video. Now let's get back into the story. I promise it's worth staying to the end." The bakery phone rang at exactly 7:30. Almost no one called that early. Caris wiped her hands on her apron and answered. "Sweet Dreams Bakery, this is Caris." The voice on the other end was precise and professional. "Good morning, Ms. Monroe. This is Barclay Quinn from Quinn, Owen and Associates. I'm calling about the estate of your godmother, Ms. Aries Holloway." Caris went still. Aries had died 3 weeks earlier, and Caris had thrown herself into work to keep from thinking about the woman who had practically raised her. "Yes," she said softly. "What about her estate?" "Ms. Holloway left you an inheritance," Quinn replied. "We need to meet as soon as possible. The nature of the assets makes it time-sensitive." "Assets?" Caris repeated, frowning. "I didn't know she had anything to leave me, besides memories." There was a pause. Then Quinn continued. "Your godmother left you at her restaurant. The Legacy Crown." A cupcake slipped from Caris's hand and splattered on the floor. The Legacy Crown wasn't just a restaurant. It was the restaurant in Atlanta. Politicians, celebrities, judges, and CEOs booked tables months in advance. Aries had started it as a tiny cafe decades ago and turned it into a legend. "There has to be a mistake," Caris whispered. "I just run a little bakery." Aries never said. "No mistake," Quinn said calmly. "Ms. Holloway was very explicit. She considered you the only person who could be trusted with her life's work." By mid-morning, Caris found herself in Quinn's office, staring at a stack of documents that confirmed what he'd said. Ownership papers, valuations, legal terms that all pointed to the same unbelievable conclusion. She was now the sole owner of the Legacy Crown, worth several $1,000,000. "Aries knew about her illness for over a year," Quinn explained gently. "She spent that time reorganizing her affairs. There are also vendor contracts, a wine cellar, and some special provisions. She left you a letter as well." He slid a sealed envelope across the desk. Caris recognized the slanted handwriting immediately. "To my dearest Caris." Her throat tightened. "Can I take this home?" she asked. "Of course. We'll need to finalize the transfer in the next few days. A restaurant like the Crown can't be leaderless for long." Caris nodded absently. Her mind slid back to childhood, the first day she had walked into the Crown's kitchen at 9 years old, watching her mother, then a pastry chef, pipe rosettes onto cakes. After pneumonia took her mother, Aries had stepped in, paying for Caris's school, teaching her to bake, telling her again and again, "You have hands that understand dough, and a heart that feeds people more than food." By the time Caris had finished signing the documents, her head buzzed with fear and gratitude in equal measure. She had learned everything she knew about desserts and hospitality from Aries, but running a world-famous restaurant felt like a mountain she wasn't sure she could climb. When she drove back to the small house she shared with her husband, it was already noon. She had planned to open the letter alone, in silence, before Jarvis came home from work. But his car was already parked in the driveway. Inside, she found him in the living room, still in a pressed shirt but with his tie loosened and a glass of whiskey in his hand. It was barely 2 in the afternoon. "You're home early," she said carefully. "Is everything okay?" Jarvis looked up. He was handsome, tall, dark hair, a face that usually wore easy confidence. Today, his expression was strained, almost panicked. "My mother called," he said flatly. "She heard you inherited the Legacy Crown." "Is that true?" Caris's fingers tightened on her purse. She hadn't told anyone yet. How did she? So it is true, he snapped, cutting her off. Why didn't you tell me? I just got back from the lawyer, she replied. I was going to explain everything tonight. Mom heard it from one of the waiter's wives. Jarvis got to his feet, pacing. Everyone's gossiping. A small-time baker suddenly owning one of the top restaurants in the city? People are shocked. And honestly, Caris, can you blame them? She flushed, stung. It wasn't as if she had asked for this. Aries was my godmother, she reminded him quietly. We were very close. Close is one thing, he said sharply. Running a multi-million-dollar business is another. This isn't a cute cupcake shop with 3 tables. This is a brand. A machine. A corporation. Caris pressed the envelope from Aries against her chest. She believed I could do it, she said. She trained me. Be realistic, Jarvis insisted. You bake beautifully, but what do you know about staffing structures? Balance sheets? Curating a wine list? I can learn, she whispered. He raked a hand through his hair, his tell when he was frustrated. Mom says this whole situation is insane. And to be honest, I agree. At the mention of his mother, Tamsin Niles, a familiar knot formed in Caris's stomach. Tamsin had never forgiven her son for marrying a woman the high society crowd called just the baker down the street. What does she have to do with this? Caris asked carefully. She's coming over for dinner, Jarvis replied. She wants to discuss the situation. My inheritance, Caris corrected. Our future, he shot back. We're married, remember? What's yours is ours. The words landed like a slap. For years, he had treated her bakery like a harmless pastime. Now that something valuable had entered the picture, suddenly everything was shared. That evening, the house filled with the heavy scent of Tamsin's perfume long before her heels tapped across the floor. As always, she let herself in without knocking. Tall, immaculately styled, she walked in as if she owned the place. Darlings, I'm here, she trilled. Caris, sweetheart, congratulations. I hear you've pulled off quite the miracle. Caris forced a polite smile. It was unexpected. Aries was always dramatic, Tamsin said with a tinkling laugh, shrugging off her coat into Jarvis's arms. Remember when she refused to seat that state representative because he was 15 minutes late? That woman lived for theatrics. Caris said nothing. Tamsin had never actually known Aries. All of her stories came second-hand, filtered through gossip at charity galas. During dinner, a meal Caris had prepared in advance, Tamsin laid out what she called a sensible plan. She spoke almost exclusively to Jarvis, barely glancing at his wife. I've spoken to Fielding, she announced between bites. My financial advisor. We have 2 viable choices, considering the current market for high-end dining. Either we sell the restaurant immediately while its name still holds value, or, she paused, clearly savoring her own cleverness. I will take over. Caris almost dropped her fork. You. Tamsin smiled as if indulging a child. Don't look so surprised, dear. Before I married, I worked as an accountant. I've always dreamed of running a restaurant. You never mentioned it, Caris murmured. There was no opportunity, Tamsin said breezily. Now there is. Jarvis, tell her, it makes sense. I handle the finances, you manage the technical side, and she, a tiny flick of her fingers toward Caris, focuses on desserts. Everyone plays to their strengths. Caris, Mom has a point, Jarvis said, uneasy but not resisting. She knows numbers. I can help with reservation systems and marketing. You can stay in the kitchen where you're happiest. And the fact that Aries left the restaurant to me? Caris asked quietly. Oh, darling, Tamsin crooned, patting her hand. It's still yours, of course. We're just talking about putting the actual management in more experienced hands. You'd be involved. You just not be burdened with decisions you're not trained for. The weight of the unopened letter in her purse suddenly felt immense. There were things Aries had wanted to say to her that no one else needed to see. "I need time to think," Caris said. "This is a huge decision." "Don't take too long," Tamsin warned, still smiling. "The market doesn't wait." Later, behind the locked bathroom door, the only place in the house where she was guaranteed a few minutes alone, Caris finally opened Aries's letter. Her godmother's handwriting flowed across the page, steady and confident. Aries wrote about living a full life, about her pride in the restaurant, but most of all about Caris. She explained why she'd chosen her goddaughter as heir, not because there were no other options, but because Caris had the rare combination of talent, intuition, and heart. She reminded Caris that she herself had started with no experience, only passion and stubbornness. She named Chef Bram Cassidy and manager Nita Price as people Caris could trust completely. And at the end, there was one more line that made Caris sit down on the edge of the tub. "Not every asset was transferred today. Some details only Barkley knows. If people try to take advantage of you, speak to him. I've made sure you can protect what truly matters." Caris pressed the letter against her chest as tears slipped down her cheeks. When she finally emerged, eyes still red but spine a little straighter, Jarvis was waiting in the bedroom holding a stack of papers. "Here," he said, offering them as if they were a formality. "Mom's lawyer drafted a power of attorney. It'll be easier if you let her handle the restaurant. Just for now. You'll still own it on paper." Caris scanned the document. It wasn't temporary at all. It granted Tamsin full, unrestricted control over the restaurant and its operations, with no time limit and no requirement to consult Caris about anything. "No," she said quietly. Jarvis's face tightened. "Caris, don't be difficult. You know you're not ready." "I'm not signing," she repeated. "Your mother wants control, not to help me." His patience snapped. He slammed the papers onto the bed. "Aries used you your whole life. Free help in the kitchen, emotional support, and now she's handed you a business you are almost guaranteed to crash. This is our chance to actually do something smart." "Don't speak about her like that," Caris said, her own voice rising for the first time since they married. The argument escalated until Jarvis grabbed the documents and, in front of her, walked them straight into his mother's hands as if they were his to give. "Your wife is being emotional," Tamsin said smoothly, tucking the papers into her bag. "But fortunately, the law recognizes marital property. You and Jarvis share everything." Caris knew enough to realize that wasn't true where inheritances were concerned, but the original paperwork was now out of her reach. She took her purse and her jacket without another word. "Where are you going?" Jarvis demanded. "To the one place that's actually mine," she said. "My bakery." That night, instead of returning home, Caris curled up on the narrow couch in the back room of Sweet Dreams. The hum of the refrigerators and the faint scent of sugar grounded her. With Aries's letter beside her and anger slowly cooling into something sharper, she made a phone call that would change everything. "Mr. Quinn," she said when the lawyer answered. "It's Caris Monroe. I need to know exactly how protected I am, and how much trouble my husband and his mother can actually cause." The next morning, Caris showed up at Quinn's office with a paper bag of still warm croissants. Baking before big decisions had always steadied her. Quinn greeted her with a small smile that didn't quite hide the steel in his eyes. He broke off a piece of croissant, tasted it and murmured, "Now I understand Aries's judgment even better." Caris didn't waste time. She told him everything, how Jarvis had snatched the papers, how Tamsin was claiming marital rights, how they tried to push a permanent power of attorney in front of her. Quinn listened, then folded his hands. "Let me reassure you about one thing," he said. "An inheritance, under Georgia law, remains your separate property unless the will specifically says otherwise. The restaurant is not automatically marital property just because you're married. Any transfer of control would require your notarized consent. We have copies of all documents, and the ownership has already been registered." So even if they wave papers around, they can't change who owns the place without your signature, Quinn finished. If they pretend otherwise in a way that affects vendors or staff, they may cause confusion, but it won't stand up legally. That's exactly the kind of chaos Aries anticipated. He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick file. The legacy crown isn't just a building with a name. Aries separated its most important parts. The wine cellar is held through a trust where you are the only beneficiary. The kitchen equipment is leased through a company under your control. Most vendor contracts are in the name of Aries Holloway and Associates, with you listed as succeeding partner. Caris blinked, stunned. Why is it so complicated? Tax planning originally, Quinn said. Now, protection. He handed her a printed list of key staff. Names, roles, phone numbers. Bram Cassidy, head chef of 15 years. Nita Price, manager since the early days. Others Aries had trusted. She wanted you to know who your allies would be, Quinn added. You can step in as owner whenever you choose. But you may also decide to wait. Wait. If your husband and his mother attempt to run the restaurant without real authority, any rash decisions they make could very quickly reveal their incompetence. Sometimes, he said carefully, it is educational to allow people room to expose their own intentions. Caris left with a file, the list, and a sense that the ground beneath her feet was less shaky than she'd feared. She still had no idea how to run a famous restaurant, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. She would not hand it over to Tamsin just because the older woman spoke louder. For the next few days, Caris returned to her routine at Sweet Dreams. She baked, decorated, and smiled at customers while pieces of news drifted in from the legacy crown. Some came through gossip. Others arrived more directly. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low, the local mail carrier, Franklin, an older man with kind eyes and a fondness for her blueberry muffins, stopped by as usual. Franklin, Caris said casually as she boxed his treat, do you still deliver near the legacy crown? Sure do, he replied. Beautiful place. I'm sorry about Ms. Holloway. She was always polite to us folks in boring uniforms. Caris hesitated. If I wrote a short note for someone on staff there, could you make sure it gets to him? The head chef. His name is Bram. For one of your muffins, Franklin joked. I might even sing while I deliver it. An hour later, he returned with a scribbled reply. Bridge by the river, 7 p.m., Bram. At exactly 7, Caris waited on the Jackson Bridge, watching the slow current of the Chattahoochee. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the air cool and damp. A man's voice spoke her name. She turned to see a tall, broad-shouldered figure in his 40s with short graying hair and the roughened hands of someone who'd sacrificed his skin to flaming pans and hot trays for years. Ms. Monroe? He asked. Bram Cassidy. Thank you for meeting me, she said, shaking his hand. I didn't know how else to reach you without stirring up a storm. They walked along the riverbank, talking quietly. Your mother-in-law showed up with your husband, Bram said, his voice dry. She introduced herself as the new owner, waved some papers at me and at Nita. I didn't look too closely. Aries warned me before she passed that there might be turbulence. How did the staff react? With alarm, Bram answered. Most of us have been here for years. We're used to stability. Ms. Niles showed up and immediately fired my sous chef, Liam, 10 years with us, because she thought his salary was too high. Then she started slashing the wine list and talking about cheaper suppliers. She wants to simplify the menu, cut anything that looks fancy. Caris felt a cold anger rising. That menu is part of what built the Crown's reputation. Bram nodded. Manager Nita tried to explain that regular guests expect consistency. Ms. Niles told her that old habits were holding the restaurant back. They stopped at the rail, looking down at the water. Bram turned to her. Aries believed in you, he said. She said you understood something deeper than recipes, that you can feel what people need at the table. That's why she left the crown to you. Not because you're safe, but because you're right. Caris flushed, embarrassed. I'm not sure I'm worthy of that. Aries didn't flatter, Bram replied. She hired me, remember. Over the next few days, Caris also met with Nita in a quiet cafe far from downtown. Nita, elegant and efficient even when stressed, described how Tamsin was tearing through the business like a storm. Firing people who questioned her, swapping trusted seafood vendors for a cut-rate contact in her social circle, trying to sell part of the wine collection only to discover she didn't even have the key to the cellar. Turns out, Nita said with a faint, satisfied smile, the cellar isn't technically part of the restaurant. Legally, it's yours. Same with most of the big contracts. We keep having to tell her we can't change anything without your approval. Back in Sweet Dreams, Caris iced cakes and quietly waited. She spoke regularly with Quinn, who assured her that every reckless move Tamsin made only strengthened their legal position. Why don't you just walk in and throw her out? Bram asked in frustration during one of their meetings. She's destroying 30 years of work. Caris stared at her hands. Because if I march in anger, Jarvis and his mother will claim I'm emotional and unprepared. But if everyone sees what happens when they get what they think they want. She let the thought hang there. Sometimes she knew people needed more rope. And Tamsin was pulling furiously. The breaking point came faster than anyone expected. Tamsin had been hacking away at the soul of the Legacy Crown for days, simplifying the menu, firing staff who pushed back, insisting that customers didn't need all that French nonsense. Many regulars quietly vanished. Some voiced their dissatisfaction openly. A respected judge who had eaten there almost every Friday for 15 years left one night without finishing his main course, telling Nita politely but firmly that this was not the restaurant he knew. Even that didn't slow Tamsin down. She launched a promotional campaign to bring in ordinary folks, dropped prices without adjusting costs, and told journalists that she was refreshing a dated institution. Her biggest misstep came when a longtime regular, a state representative, arrived late one evening to find his usual table already occupied by a local businessman who happened to be one of Tamsin's friends. When the staff hesitated, Tamsin flatly refused to move the new guest. The representative left, offended. Within hours, his angry post about being bumped for someone with connections went viral. By nightfall, local reporters were gathering details. Bram, unable to watch the restaurant he loved reduced to chaos, finally walked out. He left his apron folded on the counter, resigned on the spot, and took several cooks with him. Word of his departure and the shifting standards spread quickly through the food community. A well-known dining magazine sent a journalist to investigate. Tamsin gave a glowing interview, boasting about democratizing the menu and cutting what she called pretentious nonsense. The journalist listened, ordered a dish that used to be one of Bram's signatures, tasted the lifeless version that arrived, took a few photos, and left. 2 days later, the article hit the internet under a headline that made Tamsin's blood boil. A crown in freefall, how an Atlanta icon lost its shine in a week. The piece described the restaurant's history, Aries' philosophy, the departure of key staff, and the sharp decline in quality. Tamsin's own quotes about simple people and snobbish customers were printed alongside memories from longtime patrons who mourned what the crown had become. A hashtag began to trend, #SaveTheCrownYole. When Jarvis showed the article to his mother, she exploded. Snobs, all of them. They don't understand what real people want. Mom, he said, trying and failing to keep his voice calm, we're losing reservations. The phone barely rings. Vendors are calling about overdue invoices. Something has to change. You're taking their side now, she snapped. After everything I've done for this family? But her anger couldn't slow the downward slide. On what should have been one of the busiest nights of the week, the dining room held only a handful of tables. Rumors of Bram's departure and the scathing review had driven away most of the regulars. The discount seekers the advertising had attracted quickly realized that even with reduced prices, the food no longer justified the cost. On the 9th day after Bram quit, the front doors opened to admit several men in suits carrying folders. We're here on behalf of the legal owner of the wine collection and kitchen equipment, the lead representative said. Tamsin drew herself up. I own this restaurant, she said sharply. Everything in it is mine. The premises are under your control, the man replied evenly. The equipment and wine cellar belong to Ms. Caris Monroe, per these contracts. She has requested their removal. Within hours, the heart of the crown was being dismantled. Ovens, refrigerators, specialized stoves, the gleaming tools that had turned ingredients into artistry. Gone. The wine cellar, built over decades, emptied out bottle by bottle. Staff members watched in stunned silence. That evening, Jarvis found his mother alone in the echoing dining room, a half-empty bottle of whiskey on the table. It's over, she said hoarsely. No kitchen, no wine, no customers. We can't operate. We could buy new equipment, he offered weakly. With what? She snapped. Do you know how much a proper kitchen costs? I took out a loan against the house to renovate, because I believed we'd make it back in profits. Now we have debts and an empty shell. She stared into her glass, her voice dropping to a bitter whisper. Your wife played us. I underestimated her. The next day, a simple sign appeared on the former jewel of the city's dining scene. Closed for renovations. But everyone who had been paying attention knew there would be no renovation. The legacy crown, as Atlantans knew it, was gone. On the other side of town, in a narrow street lined with old stone buildings and arched windows, Caris walked through the dusty interior of a space she hoped to turn into something new. The landlord had been willing to offer favorable terms, especially once he realized who she was and what name she controlled. She had spent nights with Quinn, Bram, and Nita mapping out possibilities. A new restaurant. A new location. A new name that still honored the woman who started everything. They called it Aries' legacy. The crown's soul, its standard of quality, its staff, its carefully curated wine collection, even some of its furniture and linens, would live again in a fresh space. Not as a copy, but as an evolution. When Jarvis called that evening, begging for help because the crown was collapsing, Caris listened quietly from a small desk in the new restaurant's half-finished office. Mom is hysterical, he said, his voice shaking. The lawyers are talking about bankruptcy. If you could just return the equipment, talk to Bram, convince him to come back. I can't, she replied calmly. The equipment is already installed here. The wine is in the new cellar. Bram and most of the old staff are with me. There was a stunned silence. Then a broken laugh. So while we were trying to save the restaurant, you were planning your own? Stealing our people. I didn't steal anyone, Caris said. I moved what was legally mine, and the staff chose where they wanted to work. Your mother didn't lose the crown because of me. She lost it because she tried to bend it into something it was never meant to be. He insisted on seeing her in person. Against her better judgment, she told him the new address, with one condition: if he brought his mother or lawyers, she would refuse to meet. 20 minutes later, he walked into the raw, half-lit space that would soon become Aries' legacy. Stone walls, wooden beams, familiar white tablecloths carefully folded on new tables, glass-fronted wine storage waiting to be stocked. The bones were old, but the heart was newly forming. So this is where everything went, he said quietly. This, Caris replied, is where it will live. They sat in the makeshift office at the back, the smell of fresh paint still hanging in the air. Why didn't you tell me? Jarvis asked, staring at the floor. About this place. About your plans. Caris folded her hands on the desk. Would you have listened after what you did with the documents? After letting your mother march into the crown and declare herself queen? He winced. I know I messed up. I just thought Mom knew what she was doing. She said you'd drown under the pressure and that this was her chance to finally fulfill her dream. I believed she was trying to protect us. You believed her more than you believed me, Caris said quietly. That's been the pattern all along, hasn't it? He didn't argue. For a long time, he said nothing. Then, do we still have a future? It was the question she'd been dodging in her own mind for days. Did she still love him? Yes. Could she trust him? She wasn't sure. She had always known he was close to his mother, but she had never let herself look directly at how completely he let Tamsin's wishes override his own. I don't know, she answered honestly. Right now, every ounce of energy I have is going into opening this restaurant. That comes first. As for our marriage, I can't go back to what it was. If we stay together, it has to be different, built on equality, not your mother's approval. He nodded slowly, like someone beginning to realize just how high the cost of his decisions had been. What about Mom? He asked finally. She's in deep trouble, Caris. She invested everything she had, and now she's drowning in debt. I didn't ask her to gamble our relationship and Ares's work on her pride, Caris replied, though there was more weariness than spite in her tone. She had a choice. She could have approached me honestly and suggested a partnership. Instead, she treated me like an obstacle to be pushed aside. You won't help her? Caris stared at the stack of menus Bram had been developing. I won't save her from the consequences of what she did to me, she said slowly. But I also don't want Ares's name dragged through lawsuits and scandals. I'll talk to Quinn. Maybe there's a solution that doesn't leave anyone destroyed. Later, Bram stepped into the office with his usual quiet presence, menu notes in hand. How did it go? He asked after Jarvis left. Better than I expected, Caris admitted. He's starting to see his mother clearly. It hurts him, but he's finally waking up. And her. She's still clinging to her pride, Caris said. But the ground under her is cracking. I'm thinking about offering a lease on the old Crown building for a different restaurant, her restaurant, with a new name and concept. Bram raised an eyebrow. You're kinder than I am. Ares believed in leaving room for people to grow, Caris murmured. I'd rather build something new than stand on top of someone else's ruin. Days blurred into preparations. The old building in the 4th Ward transformed. Stone walls were softened with framed black and white photos of Atlanta through the decades, interspersed with candid pictures of Ares at different ages, laughing over a mixing bowl, raising a glass with staff, standing in front of the original cafe that would become the Crown. Fresh lavender and wild herbs, Ares's favorite, filled tall vases at the center of each table. White linens gleamed. Silverware shone. The wine cellar, now properly secured under Caris's name, was stocked and catalogued. On the morning of the grand opening, sunlight washed over the cobblestones outside. Caris arrived before anyone else, wanting a few minutes to breathe alone in the space she had fought so hard to create. She walked between the tables, straightening chairs, tracing a fingertip along the polished wood. In the kitchen, Bram and his team were already at work, voices low, movements precise. Nita moved through the dining room with a checklist, reviewing reservations and staff assignments. How are you feeling? Nita asked. Like I'm standing at the edge of a cliff, Caris replied, then smiled. But also like I finally found the right jump. Ares would be proud, Nita said. And, for what it's worth, so am I. The afternoon passed in a blur of last-minute adjustments. At 4 o'clock, with an hour to go before opening, there was a knock at the door. Through the glass, Caris saw Jarvis standing there in jeans and a simple shirt, clutching a bouquet of white roses, her favorite. She hesitated, then opened the door. I know you're busy, he said quickly. I'm not here to cause trouble. I just wanted to wish you luck. Thank you, she said, accepting the flowers. Are you staying? I don't think I should, he answered. Not tonight. This is your moment. I don't want the staff distracted, wondering which side I'm on. I just wanted you to know that I see what you've done, and I'm proud of you. And, he paused, swallowing. I've moved into my own place. Away from Mom. I need to figure out who I am without her voice in my ear every minute. Caris was genuinely surprised. That step, for Jarvis, was enormous. I'm glad, she said. Not for us yet, but for you. And Mom? He asked. I told Quinn not to sell the old building yet, Caris replied. I'm going to offer her a lease at a fair price, on one condition. New name, new menu, no use of Aries' brand or recipes. She can build something of her own, the casual, accessible place she wanted, without stomping on what the crown was. He stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. After everything she did. You'd still do that? I'm not doing it for her, Caris said. I'm doing it for myself, and for Aries. I don't need revenge to feel strong anymore. At 5 o'clock sharp, the doors of Aries' legacy opened to the first guests, long-time customers of the crown, friends of Aries, local critics, and carefully invited members of the press. Caris greeted each of them personally. When everyone was seated, she stepped into the center of the room and raised a glass. Good evening, she began. Thank you for joining us on a day that means more to me than I can say. Many of you knew my godmother, Aries Holloway. She built a small cafe into a place that became part of Atlanta's story. Today, we're not trying to recreate what she did, we're continuing it. She spoke about honoring tradition without being trapped by it, about Southern flavors with modern touches, about food as memory and comfort and celebration. She ended with a simple toast. To Aries, who taught us that the best meals leave you full in both body and heart, and to new beginnings that don't forget where they came from. Glasses clinked. Applause filled the room. The first plates left the kitchen. The opening night was everything Caris had dared to hope for and more. Dishes she and Bram had developed together, lamb with rosemary and truffle mash, a refined take on an old Georgia fish recipe, a dessert lineup crowned by her lavender honey cake, earned murmurs of delight and scribbled notes from critics. Each plate carried a small card with a tiny story, a memory of Aries, a glimpse of the old cafe, an anecdote about how a dish had been born. Guests lingered long after dessert, trading stories, laughing, occasionally wiping away a tear when they mentioned Aries. Caris floated from table to table, listening, explaining, and thanking. By midnight, the room was nearly empty. Staff members, exhausted but glowing, hugged each other in the kitchen. Bram allowed himself a rare, wide smile. Nita looked at the reservation book for the coming weeks and shook her head in disbelief. We're almost fully booked for the next 3 weekends, she told Caris. Whatever the critics write tomorrow is just icing on the cake. The next morning, every local dining site carried headlines about Aries' legacy. The reviews were glowing. Many emphasized that, while the legacy crown had stumbled and fallen, its real spirit had simply moved. A week later, during a quiet hour between lunch and dinner, an unexpected guest appeared. Tamsin Niles walked in wearing a modest gray suit instead of her usual bright colors. Without heavy makeup and dramatic jewelry, she looked older and smaller. May I speak with the owner? She asked Nita formally. Soon she was seated across from Caris in the office where so many new plans had been drawn. I came about the lease, Tamsin said, smoothing her skirt with nervous hands. The building that used to house the crown. Caris nodded. I told Quinn to prepare an option, but I wasn't sure you'd be willing to take it. At first I wasn't, Tamsin admitted. Pride is a stubborn thing. I told myself I'd rather lose the building than accept your help. Then I saw what was left of my savings. And the loan documents. And the empty dining room with the sign on the door. She forced a small, brittle smile. Reality is less interested in my pride than I am. What do you want to do with the space? Caris asked. I want to open a different kind of restaurant, Tamsin said. A bistro. Good, honest food at prices normal families can afford. No French names, no tiny art projects on plates. Just comfort. I think there's room in this city for that too. I agree, Caris said honestly. That area could use exactly that kind of place. I'm willing to lease you the building at a fair rate, on the conditions I mentioned. New name. No references to the legacy crown or to Aries. No borrowing that history. That's fair, Tamsin said quietly. She hesitated, then looked up. There's something else I want to say. And you have no idea how hard this is for me. Caris waited. I'm sorry, Tamsin managed at last. For the way I treated you. For the names I called you behind your back. For what I did with the restaurant. I was jealous of what you had with Aries. I was furious that she trusted you more than me, and I convinced myself you weren't worthy. I let that resentment steer everything. For a moment, the office was silent except for the hum of the refrigerator in the hallway. I appreciate your apology, Caris said finally. And I accept it. That doesn't erase what happened, but it lets us move forward without dragging it everywhere we go. Thank you, Tamsin whispered, visibly relieved. As she rose to leave, she paused at the door. One more thing. Jarvis. He's trying, you know. He's been going to therapy. He's learning to say no to me. It's unnerving. Caris gave a faint, surprised laugh. That sounds like progress. It is, Tamsin admitted. For him. And for me. That evening, Caris stood at the bar watching her restaurant come to life again. Staff moved in smooth coordination. The kitchen hummed. Guests laughed. Glasses clinked. As she watched, she felt a quiet certainty settle over her. Whatever storms came next, she would not lose herself again. This, she thought, was what Aries had really left her. Not just a business, but a chance to stand fully in who she was. Later in the week, during a busy dinner service, the sommelier approached her with a bottle cradled in his arms. Ms. Monroe, he said softly. A guest at table 5 asked me to bring this to you. He said it was Ms. Holloway's favorite vintage, the one she only opened on truly special nights. Caris took the bottle, recognizing the label immediately. She looked toward table 5. Jarvis sat alone at a corner table, watching the room without trying to intrude. When their eyes met, he didn't wave or gesture. He just offered a small, tentative smile. Caris looked down at the bottle, then back at the restaurant that was now undeniably hers. She thought of the long path that had led her, the betrayal, the fear, the late-night planning, the stubborn refusal to sign away her future. She turned to the sommelier. Open it, she said. Pour 2 glasses. I'll join him in a moment. She still didn't know what would become of her marriage. Trust, once cracked, doesn't knit itself back together overnight. But she knew this much. Whatever choice she made now would not be based on fear or obligation. It would be hers, fully. She walked through the restaurant, past the tables of people enjoying food born of Aries' teaching and her own imagination. With every step, she felt that new strength inside her, a strength that had always been there, hidden under years of trying to keep the peace. In the story's framing, Auntie May's warm voice would return. Thank you for staying with me to the end. If this story touched you, show it some love by liking the video and subscribing to the channel. Tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is. I love seeing our little family all over the world. I share new life stories every single day. And now, 2 of my most popular episodes are popping up on your screen. Go ahead. Choose your next story. Caris reached Jarvis's table, the wine glinting between them. Whatever came next, reconciliation, goodbye, or something in between, she knew one thing for sure. Aries' legacy was alive, and so was her own.